Imagine, just for a moment, a room filled with silence so deep it seems to press against your ears. No cars outside, no hum of appliances, not even the faint whistle of the wind through the trees. Time itself feels suspended, and yet inside you there is no quiet. There is a restless murmur, a whispering that refuses to be drowned out. That sound is not from the outside world, it is your unconscious mind struggling to be heard. We rarely pay attention to this inner murmur. Life pulls us outward with relentless force. Work deadlines, family obligations, bills to be paid, relationships to maintain. Society, then as now, rewards those who keep their eyes fixed on the external. The louder the world becomes, the easier it is to ignore the quieter voice within. But Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist whose work reshaped our understanding of the human psyche, warned us that ignoring this inner voice comes at a price. That murmur, he said, is not random. It is your truest self demanding recognition. To understand how radical this idea was, we have to step back into Jung's world. Born in 1875 in the small Swiss village of Keswil, Jung grew up in a Europe balancing on the tightrope between tradition and modernity. Industrialization was changing the rhythms of daily life. Science was undermining old certainties. The church still held sway, but cracks were showing in the authority of organized religion. Against this backdrop, psychology was still an infant science. Sigmund Freud had just begun to map the terrain of dreams and desires, introducing the idea that much of human behavior is shaped by forces beyond our conscious control. Jung admired Freud, at least at first. He called him a father figure, the pioneer who opened the door to the unconscious. But Jung sensed something Freud had missed. Freud focused heavily on repressed sexuality and childhood conflicts. Jung agreed those mattered, but he saw a wider, stranger, deeper ocean beneath the surface of the mind, something collective, shared across all humanity. He was convinced that dreams, myths, and symbols were not just personal quirks, but messages from this deeper unconscious that could guide us toward wholeness. This is where the image of the room of silence becomes more than a metaphor. Jung believed that if we stripped away the noise of modern life, if we dared to sit still and listen, we would discover that the unconscious is always speaking to us. Not in words, but in images. In the sudden appearance of a dream that unsettles you for days. In the irrational attraction to someone who mirrors something unresolved within yourself. In the persistent anxiety you feel in a relationship that others insist looks perfect from the outside. Why does this matter? Because, Jung insisted, every moment we ignore these signals, we pay with a piece of our soul. We grow restless, dissatisfied, chronically uneasy. You might wake up one morning and feel inexplicably trapped, as if you are living someone else's life. That sensation is not a weakness. It is a symptom of disconnection from your inner truth. The idea that your unconscious should guide your life decisions was not only controversial in Jung's time, it was revolutionary. In an age when Europe was marching toward mechanization, efficiency, and conformity, Jung was essentially saying, stop, listen, turn inward. Don't just chase what society tells you to value. Ask instead, what does my inner self demand? It was a message that clashed with both the rigid moral codes of religion and the cold rationalism of science. But here's the irony. Jung's warning feels even more urgent today. In the 21st century, our external world has grown even louder. Social media floods us with images of how our lives should look. Work emails chase us into our homes at all hours. Success is measured in clicks, likes, promotions, and possessions. Against this tidal wave of noise, the quiet voice within seems fainter than ever. Yet Jung would tell us that voice is the only compass that can point toward authenticity. Think about a time in your own life when the noise outside and the murmur inside collided. Perhaps you stayed in a job that looked perfect on paper, but made you dread waking up every morning. Or maybe you were in a relationship that everyone else admired, yet deep down you felt a gnawing discomfort you couldn't explain. Jung would say that discomfort is your unconscious speaking, a flare shot into the night sky of your psyche, demanding you pay attention. Every culture has, in some form, recognized this inner voice. The ancient Greeks spoke of the daimon, a guiding spirit unique to each person. Indigenous traditions in the Americas emphasized dreams and visions as pathways to truth. Even in the Bible, prophets often hear a still small voice guiding them. Jung saw himself as continuing this lineage, but grounding it in psychology rather than theology. He wasn't merely offering spiritual comfort. He was mapping a practical method for listening to what the unconscious is trying to say. And at the center of this project lies a decisive question. One Jung believed every person must confront sooner or later. Will you choose to nurture your inner peace, or will you sacrifice it to maintain harmony with others? It's not an easy choice. From childhood, we are conditioned to prioritize acceptance, to please others, to fit in. We are told that keeping the peace with family, friends, or colleagues is an act of love. But Jung turned that logic upside down. What kind of love is it, he asked, if it demands you betray your own essence? That is the challenge we carry into every relationship, every workplace, every friendship. And it is the theme that will carry us through this entire story. The constant tug-of-war between the noise of the external world and the murmur of the unconscious. From the moment we take our first steps, the world around us begins shaping us into something it finds acceptable. Parents, teachers, peers, all of them pass down expectations like heirlooms. You should study hard. You should marry the right kind of person. You should work tirelessly and climb the ladder. You should not make waves. These are the subtle instructions written into the fabric of society. And whether in Jung's Switzerland a century ago or in modern America, the message is the same. Peace with others is more valuable than peace within yourself. Carl Jung understood how powerful these external demands could be. He grew up in a household where religion was not just a Sunday ritual, but a living presence. His father was a pastor in the Swiss Reformed Church, and Jung often saw firsthand the conflict between outward conformity and inner doubt. He watched his father wrestle with faith, presenting certainty to his congregation while secretly questioning doctrines in private. This tension, the demand to appear stable and faithful while inwardly divided, made a lasting impression on Jung. It showed him how corrosive it can be to live according to external expectations while ignoring the quiet truths within. If you look at early 20th century Europe, conformity wasn't simply encouraged, it was enforced. Industrialization demanded punctuality, discipline, and efficiency. Religion still dictated moral codes. Even art, science, and politics often expected people to toe the line of what was respectable. In America, too, the rise of the suburban dream after World War II pressed people into molds. A tidy lawn, 2 cars in the driveway, a smiling couple with children in the yard. It looked like harmony, but how many individuals, behind closed doors, felt suffocated by this picture of perfection? Jung's voice cut across this landscape like a knife. He dared to suggest that perhaps keeping the peace was not peace at all. That love, stripped of authenticity, was a performance, not a truth. In his lectures and writings, he urged people to ask themselves, whose life am I really living? Is it mine, or is it the version handed down to me by others? We often underestimate how much of ourselves we sacrifice to maintain this illusion of harmony. Imagine the man who stays at a corporate job he despises because his parents expect stability, or the woman who keeps silent in a marriage that drains her spirit because divorce is considered shameful in her community. Outwardly, these lives look neat, successful, even enviable. But inside, a disconnection is growing, and with it, a deep fatigue of the soul. This exhaustion, Jung explained, is not random. It is the natural consequence of misalignment between your conscious choices and your unconscious needs. You are forcing yourself to walk a road your deeper self never agreed to travel. And the farther you go, the more that inner murmur turns into a roar. Sometimes it surfaces as anxiety, sometimes as depression, sometimes as a vague restlessness you cannot name. Modern psychology has confirmed much of what Jung intuited. Studies on role conflict show that people who live lives dictated by external pressures, cultural, familial, professional, are more likely to experience chronic stress, burnout, and even physical illness. It's as if the body itself rebels when the soul is denied. We can think of the rising rates of stress-related disorders or the epidemic of quiet despair hidden behind curated social media feeds as proof of Jung's century-old warning. And yet, society continues to reward performance over authenticity. Think about how we praise those who sacrifice their health for their jobs, or those who put up with toxic relationships because they don't want to upset family dynamics. We call it strength. We call it loyalty. But Jung would call it denial. The paradox is this: society tells us that peace is found in pleasing others, but true peace comes only when we dare to disappoint them. Jung believed that the greatest act of love is not to conform, but to bring your authentic self into relationship. Only then is connection real. But this choice between social acceptance and inner truth is not an abstract problem. It plays out in the smallest details of daily life. Do you say yes to an invitation when every part of you wants to say no? Do you stay silent to avoid conflict when your heart is screaming to speak? Do you continue a path others admire even as your own spirit grows smaller and smaller? Jung insisted that each of these moments is a crossroads. Each yes or no is not just a social transaction. It is a declaration of who you are. The question is, will you choose yourself, or will you continue to vanish behind the mask society has given you? This is where Jung's ideas become both radical and deeply unsettling. Because he did not promise that choosing authenticity would be easy. On the contrary, he warned that it would be lonely, painful, even frightening. You risk rejection, misunderstanding, isolation. But he also believed it was the only path that led to wholeness. In his time, Jung saw patients who outwardly lived enviable lives, wealthy, respected, well-married, but inwardly were collapsing. They came to him in despair, unable to explain why they felt so empty. He would ask them to look not at the world outside, but at the world within. What was being ignored? What voice was being silenced? And slowly, painfully, many discovered that they had spent years living someone else's life. This, Jung argued, is the great tragedy of modern existence: to win the world's approval while losing your soul. But he also believed in redemption, because the moment you decide to listen to the murmur within, no matter how faint, you begin the journey back to yourself. And so we arrive at the heart of his challenge: to see through the glittering mask society offers and dare to ask the most dangerous question of all: what do I truly want? Every human connection leaves behind a trace. Some feel like fingerprints pressed gently into soft clay, encouraging, tender, life-giving. Others strike like scars carved into wood, marking us with patterns of exhaustion and pain. Jung believed this wasn't accidental. Every relationship we enter into, whether with family, friends, lovers, or colleagues, reshapes us in some way. Some awaken the best in us. Others disconnect us from our essence. Think about the relationships that lift you up. A friend who sees your hidden potential when you doubt yourself. A mentor who pushes you to risk more, not because they need you to succeed, but because they believe you can. A partner who doesn't ask you to shrink, but to expand. These are not just pleasant encounters. According to Jung, they are encounters with parts of your unconscious that long to be expressed: confidence, courage, creativity. When someone draws those out of you, it's not magic. It's resonance. They are helping you align with your own deeper truth. And then there are the other kinds of relationships, the draining ones. A parent whose criticism echoes in your mind long after childhood. A partner who seems to pull energy from you like a leech. A colleague who manipulates and undermines while smiling across the table. These dynamics, Jung argued, are not mere bad luck. They are signals of misalignment. They reveal a fracture between what your conscious mind tolerates and what your unconscious knows is corrosive. Jung often said that people come to therapy not because they have too much pain, but because they no longer understand the meaning of their pain. The same applies to relationships. You may stay in a connection that looks perfect from the outside, a happy marriage, a solid career team. Yet every day you feel the heaviness of dread. That dread is your psyche sending a message. Something here is off, and your soul knows it. To illustrate this, Jung sometimes used the language of energy. He described the psyche as a system that thrives when energy flows naturally between conscious and unconscious. Relationships, then, can either feed this flow or block it. When they feed it, you feel alive, inspired, open to possibility. When they block it, you feel tired, insecure, unable to imagine a future. The longer you remain in a draining dynamic, the more your unconscious begins to rebel. Anxiety, resentment, even physical symptoms can emerge as warning signs. We can see this in everyday life. Consider the woman who always leaves family gatherings with a migraine because her relatives constantly belittle her. Or the man who spends years under the thumb of a controlling boss, only to find his body developing stress-related illnesses. These are not coincidences. They are the psyche's way of shouting what the conscious mind refuses to say. This relationship is hurting you. Of course, Jung didn't believe all painful relationships should be abandoned. Some are teachers in disguise. A harsh critic may reveal the insecurity you've buried in your shadow. A jealous partner might force you to examine your own boundaries. The point, he insisted, is not to run from conflict, but to listen to what it is trying to tell you about yourself. This is why analytical psychology reframes conflict as opportunity. Every clash, whether a shouting match with a spouse or a silent withdrawal from a friend, holds a mirror to the unconscious. What is being triggered? What part of you is being denied, ignored, or distorted? If you lean into that discomfort instead of escaping it, you may discover not just the truth of the relationship, but a hidden truth about yourself. Cultural history offers countless examples of this dynamic. In Greek mythology, Narcissus could not see his own image until it appeared reflected in the water. Likewise, many of us cannot recognize our deepest wounds until they are mirrored in another person. Literature, too, is filled with characters undone by relationships that expose their hidden flaws. Think of Shakespeare's Othello, whose jealousy is fed by Iago, but rooted in his own shadow. These stories endure because they dramatize what Jung argued. We come to know ourselves most clearly in the crucible of relationship. But here is where it becomes unsettling. If relationships are mirrors, then the people who drain us may not just be villains in our story. They may be reflecting something unresolved within us. The partner who constantly demands attention may be echoing our own unhealed need for validation. The friend who criticizes us may be voicing the same judgments we secretly hurl at ourselves. Jung called this projection, when what we cannot face within is unconsciously cast onto others. It's a bitter pill to swallow. It is far easier to blame others than to admit they might be revealing pieces of our shadow. Yet Jung insisted this was where growth begins, because once you recognize the projection, you stop fighting ghosts and start confronting the real source, your own unconscious patterns. This doesn't mean you must stay in harmful dynamics. On the contrary, recognizing projection often clarifies when it's time to leave. If you understand what a toxic relationship is teaching you, you can walk away without clinging to the illusion that it will someday change. The lesson has been delivered. The rest is up to you. So the imprint of relationships, whether nourishing or draining, is never neutral. Each one is a signal, a message from the unconscious, an invitation to grow, or a warning to realign. To ignore these imprints is to risk living in chronic dissatisfaction, but to face them is to enter the path of transformation. This was Jung's challenge, to stop seeing relationships merely as sources of comfort or pain, and instead as mirrors of the soul. What they reveal may disturb us, but it is in that disturbance, he believed, that the seeds of individuation, the becoming of one's true self, are sown. If the unconscious cannot speak in neat, well-formed sentences, then how does it reach us? For Jung, the answer was clear. It communicates in the language of symbols, dreams, emotions, synchronicities. These are not random sparks of the mind, but carefully woven signals from a deeper layer of the psyche. And they carry with them truths that the conscious mind is too rigid or too frightened to accept. Think about the last time you woke up from a dream that clung to you all morning, even as the details slipped away. Perhaps you saw yourself standing in a vast, empty house, or falling endlessly through dark water, or being chased by something you couldn't name. Jung would urge you not to dismiss such experiences as meaningless. To him, dreams were coded letters from the unconscious, written in a universal language older than words. This was not a romantic notion pulled out of thin air. Jung spent decades studying myths, folklore, and religious traditions from cultures across the world. He found astonishing parallels between the dreams of modern individuals and the stories told by ancient peoples. A man in Zurich might dream of descending into a cave filled with serpents. Halfway across the globe, an indigenous myth might describe the hero's journey into the underworld where serpents guard hidden treasure. To Jung, this could not be coincidence. It was evidence of what he called the collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of symbols and archetypes embedded in the human psyche. These archetypes, the mother, the hero, the trickster, the shadow, are not characters from fairy tales. They are psychological realities that emerge in dreams, fantasies, and relationships. The shadow, in particular, was central to Jung's work. It represents the parts of ourselves we repress or deny because they don't fit the image we want to show the world. Anger, jealousy, greed, shame, all the impulses we bury find a home in the shadow. But burying them doesn't erase them. Instead, they whisper to us through dreams and symbols, demanding acknowledgement. Consider a dream where you're chased by a dark figure through unfamiliar streets. Jung would say that figure is not an external enemy, but your own shadow, pressing you to confront the aspects of yourself you'd rather avoid. The more you run, the louder the pursuit becomes. Only when you turn and face it, when you admit, for example, your capacity for anger or your hunger for control, does the dream shift. By confronting the shadow, you reclaim the energy once spent suppressing it. Cultures throughout history have understood this in their own ways. Medieval alchemists, whom Jung studied intensely, spoke of nigredo, the blackening stage, where all impurities must be revealed before transformation can begin. Native American traditions often describe dreams as visitations from spirits carrying guidance. In the Bible, Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams as divine warnings of famine. Across centuries and continents, humanity has agreed on one thing: symbols matter. But in the modern world, especially in the industrial and digital age, we've grown skeptical. We demand logic, measurable proof, scientific data. To Jung, this skepticism was part of the problem. By dismissing dreams and symbols as irrational, we cut ourselves off from the very compass that could guide us back to authenticity. He argued that ignoring symbols is like ignoring road signs while driving. Eventually, you will get lost. Jung himself lived what he preached. After his famous break with Freud in 1913, a rupture so painful it nearly destroyed him, he entered a period of intense inner exploration. He called it his confrontation with the unconscious. During these years, he recorded visions and dialogues with dream figures in what later became known as the Red Book. Dragons, wise old men, serpents, and gods filled his inner landscapes. To outsiders, it may have looked like madness, but for Jung, it was revelation. By listening to these symbols, he pieced together a map of the psyche that continues to guide psychology today. And so the question turns back to us. What are the symbols in our own lives trying to tell us? That recurring dream of being trapped in a locked room, what hidden fear of limitation does it reveal? That sudden surge of jealousy when a colleague succeeds? What repressed insecurity is begging for attention? Even the body becomes symbolic, a tight chest, a clenched jaw, an aching back. These, too, are the shadow's voice, physical expressions of what the conscious mind refuses to admit. To engage with these symbols is not easy. It requires courage to face what we'd rather not see. But Jung believed it was the only path to wholeness. Symbols are invitations to dialogue with the unconscious, to acknowledge that we are far more complex, far more mysterious than the roles society assigns us. And when we dare to listen, we begin to uncover truths hidden not just about ourselves, but about the human condition itself. Dreams are not merely personal. They are windows into a collective story we are all living, echoes of myths that stretch back to the dawn of humanity. To ignore them is to cut ourselves off from the deepest sources of wisdom available to us. To honor them is to step onto the path of transformation. Every person carries a hidden twin. It walks behind us in silence, gathering all the traits, impulses, and desires we shove out of sight. We may pretend it isn't there, but it watches us, waits for us, and whispers when we are weakest. Jung called this presence the shadow. He did not invent the term, but he gave it a depth that transformed it into one of psychology's most enduring concepts. To Jung, the shadow was not simply evil. It was everything about ourselves we refused to acknowledge. And that refusal, he warned, comes at a cost. The shadow begins forming in childhood. A boy who cries too easily is told to toughen up, so he buries his vulnerability. A girl who speaks too boldly is scolded for being unladylike, so she hides her assertiveness. A child who feels jealousy, anger, or shame is told these emotions are ugly, so they are locked away. Each time we repress something, the shadow grows. It becomes a bag dragged behind us, heavy with everything we've disowned. But the weight doesn't vanish. It spills into our lives in disguised forms: bitterness in a marriage, manipulation at work, self-sabotage in friendships. Jung's insight was that the shadow does not simply disappear because we wish it gone. Instead, it demands recognition. It intrudes through dreams, through sudden eruptions of anger, through the uncanny sense that life keeps repeating the same patterns. The controlling boss who drives you mad may be echoing the control you secretly crave but refuse to admit. The jealous partner who suffocates you may be reflecting your own unspoken fear of abandonment. What we hate most in others often reveals what we cannot face in ourselves. This is why letting go, whether of a toxic relationship, a suffocating career, or an identity built on falsehood, is so difficult. The shadow resists. It clings to the familiar, even when the familiar is killing us. Better the pain we know, it whispers, than the terrifying emptiness of the unknown. Jung compared this resistance to death and rebirth. Letting go feels like dying because it requires burying a version of ourselves we've lived with for years. Yet only in that burial can something new emerge. Consider the patient who stayed in a loveless marriage for decades. Outwardly, she told herself she was preserving stability for her children. Inwardly, her shadow whispered of fear of loneliness, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as a failure. When the marriage finally ended, she described the first months as unbearable, a void she thought she would never survive. And then, slowly, she felt life returning. Colors brighter, sleep deeper, creativity stirring. It was as if, in releasing the relationship, she had released parts of herself she had forgotten even existed. Religions and myths across history echo this same pattern. The phoenix must burn before it rises. In the alchemical process, metals must undergo fire before becoming gold. Christ descends into death before resurrection. For Jung, these were not coincidences but archetypes, symbols of the universal truth that transformation demands sacrifice. Something must die for something new to be born. And yet, most of us resist. We cling to the job that drains us because it pays the bills. We stay bound to friendships that belittle us because they are familiar. We tolerate partners who shrink us because we cannot imagine life alone. The shadow tells us this is safer than change. But Jung insisted that safety is an illusion. The longer we deny what must be released, the louder the unconscious protests. Illness, despair, and chronic dissatisfaction are the tolls we pay for refusing to let go. The process of confronting the shadow does not mean destroying it. Jung was clear: the shadow is not an enemy to be slain, but a part of the self to be integrated. When you admit your anger, it can be channeled into assertiveness. When you accept your vulnerability, it becomes a bridge to intimacy. When you acknowledge your jealousy, it can transform into a desire for growth. Integration does not erase the shadow. It allows you to live with it honestly, without letting it rule from the dark. Letting go, then, is both an ending and an invitation. It is the act of loosening your grip on the false peace society demands and opening yourself to the uncertain but authentic life waiting on the other side. Jung called this individuation, the slow, painful, but profoundly rewarding process of becoming who you truly are. It may begin with something as small as saying no to an invitation that drains you, or as monumental as walking away from a life you no longer recognize as your own. Either way, each act of letting go sends a signal to the unconscious. I am listening now. I am willing to face what I've hidden. I am ready to choose peace even if it costs me comfort. And here lies the paradox Jung understood so well. The moment you surrender the familiar, the universe responds. Doors you didn't know existed begin to open. People you never imagined meeting appear in your path. Synchronicities multiply. It feels as though life itself has been waiting for you to release the old so it could finally deliver the new. But this doesn't happen without courage. To let go is to step into the unknown with empty hands, trusting that what you carry within is enough. It is to face your shadow and say, I see you, I hear you, and I will no longer let fear dictate my choices. In that moment, you reclaim your power, and with it, the possibility of living a life that is not just bearable, but whole. Stand in front of a mirror and you expect to see yourself. But in Jung's psychology, every relationship you enter is a mirror too, whether you recognize it or not. The faces of friends, lovers, rivals, even strangers on the street, they all reflect fragments of your inner world. Sometimes these reflections are flattering, showing you kindness, courage, or creativity you didn't know you had. Other times they are brutal, forcing you to confront anger, jealousy, or weakness you would rather deny. Jung called this the principle of projection, and it is one of the most unsettling truths about human connection. When you are fascinated by someone, Jung suggested, it is often because they embody qualities you have not yet allowed yourself to develop. The artist whose freedom inspires you may be reflecting your own unexpressed creativity. The confident speaker who seems to command every room may be showing you a part of yourself that longs to be heard. What we admire in others is not foreign, it is dormant within us. But the darker side of projection is harder to swallow. When someone irritates you beyond reason, when their flaws seem unbearable, Jung would ask, are they showing you something you cannot bear to see in yourself? The neighbor whose arrogance makes your blood boil might be holding up a mirror to your own pride. The colleague who criticizes you relentlessly might echo the inner critic already screaming inside your head. It is easier to despise these traits when they appear in others than to admit they also live within us. History itself offers examples of projection on a grand scale. Entire nations have projected their shadows onto enemies, demonizing other peoples for traits they cannot acknowledge in their own culture. Political leaders rally followers by painting outsiders as embodiments of greed, corruption, or cruelty, all the while ignoring those same qualities at home. Jung, who lived through both world wars, was painfully aware of this dynamic. He warned that unless individuals confront their own shadows, societies will repeat the same destructive cycles, each time projecting darkness outward rather than facing it within. On the personal level, projection can be both destructive and transformative. Consider a marriage where one partner constantly accuses the other of being selfish. Beneath the accusations lies a hidden truth. The accuser may be blind to their own self-absorption. Or picture a friendship where one person idolizes the other, treating them as flawless. That pedestal is not reality. It is projection. And sooner or later, the illusion will crumble, often leaving behind disillusionment and bitterness. Yet projection is not always a curse. When we recognize it, it becomes a key to self-knowledge. Jung encouraged his patients to ask in moments of intense irritation or infatuation, "What is this showing me about myself?" The answer is rarely comfortable, but it is often liberating. By owning the qualities we project, whether positive or negative, we reclaim them as parts of our own psyche. Imagine, for instance, a man who despises his domineering boss. Through reflection, he realizes what angers him most is not the boss's control, but his own failure to set boundaries. The rage he feels is really directed at himself. By recognizing this, he can change, not by waiting for the boss to behave differently, but by learning to assert himself. The projection becomes a teacher. This is why Jung saw relationships not just as emotional entanglements, but as crucibles of growth. Each person we encounter, no matter how fleetingly, holds up a mirror. Some mirrors flatter, some distort. Some reveal wounds we would rather not see. But all of them invite us to ask, what part of myself is being reflected here? This perspective reframes even the most painful encounters. A betrayal, while devastating, might force you to confront your own fear of abandonment. A rivalry could highlight the ambition you have suppressed. A romance that ends badly may reveal the dependency you need to outgrow. None of this means mistreatment should be tolerated. Jung was clear. Recognizing projection does not excuse harmful behavior. But it does mean that even in suffering, there is the possibility of transformation. Literature captures this truth vividly. Consider J. Gatsby in Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, projecting his fantasies onto Daisy, seeing not the flawed woman she was, but an idealized figure who could redeem his past. Or Shakespeare's Hamlet, whose disgust for his uncle mirrors his own paralyzing inability to act. These stories endure because they dramatize how easily we project our shadows and dreams onto others, and how devastating or illuminating the results can be. In our own lives, the challenge is not to escape projection, because it is inevitable, but to become conscious of it. Jung argued that the more we integrate the shadow, the less we are ruled by unconscious projections. We begin to see people more clearly, not as distorted mirrors of our inner world, but as whole individuals. With this clarity comes freedom. The freedom to set boundaries without rage, to admire without idolatry, to love without illusion. And so, relationships cease to be battlegrounds of blame or pedestals of fantasy. They become mirrors in which we recognize not only who others are, but who we are becoming. To walk this path requires honesty, humility, and above all, courage. Because when you dare to look into these mirrors, you may discover a truth you've been avoiding all along. The face staring back is your own. If Jung's psychology could be distilled into one word, it would be individuation. It is the process of becoming who you truly are, shedding the masks society has placed upon you, and integrating the hidden pieces of your soul. Individuation is not self-indulgence. It is not a fleeting search for pleasure or success. It is the profound, often painful, journey of aligning your outer life with your inner truth. And it demands more courage than most people realize. Jung described individuation as a confrontation with the unconscious. To undertake it is to step off the well-paved road of convention and wander into the wilderness of your own psyche. That wilderness is dark, filled with symbols, shadows, and contradictions you would rather avoid. Yet within it lies the possibility of rebirth. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, Jung once wrote. To grow into yourself, you must first descend. History offers us a glimpse into Jung's own descent. After his break with Freud in 1913, Jung plunged into a period of crisis so severe that colleagues feared for his sanity. Night after night, he recorded visions, dialogues, and images that poured from his unconscious. Dragons, prophets, and mythic landscapes filled his notebooks. Out of this period came the Red Book, a massive manuscript that remained hidden for decades. It revealed not only Jung's personal struggles, but the foundation of his most influential ideas. Archetypes, the collective unconscious, and individuation. He had lived the process he later described, and he bore the scars to prove it. What does individuation look like for the rest of us? Often it begins with discomfort, a job that no longer feels meaningful, a relationship that suffocates rather than nurtures, a gnawing sense that life has become a performance rather than an expression of truth. This discomfort, Jung insisted, is not failure. It is the psyche signaling that the next stage of growth is calling. The trouble is that growth rarely feels like growth at first. It feels like loss. To individuate, you must let go of roles that once defined you: the dutiful child, the tireless worker, the agreeable partner. These identities provide security, but they also keep you small. Shedding them can feel like betrayal, not only of others, but of the self you once thought you were. It is little wonder that so many resist. And yet, when the process is embraced, individuation brings extraordinary clarity. You begin to see patterns that once ruled your life unconsciously. The controlling relationships you tolerated, the destructive habits you repeated, the fears that kept you silent, all of them become visible. With visibility comes choice. You are no longer a puppet of the unconscious. You begin, step by step, to reclaim authorship of your story. This is not a solitary journey. Jung emphasized that individuation often unfolds within relationships. Conflict with a partner may force you to recognize your dependency. Disappointment with a friend may reveal your tendency to project. Even the betrayal of an enemy can become a catalyst, pushing you to discover strength you did not know you had. Painful as they are, these encounters are part of the alchemy of growth. They burn away illusions so that something more authentic can emerge. Modern psychology has continued to affirm Jung's insight. Studies in developmental theory suggest that the most significant growth in adulthood often follows crises: divorce, job loss, illness. These crises strip away old identities, leaving a void. But in that void lies the opportunity to rebuild a life more aligned with one's core values. In other words, individuation is not just a lofty ideal. It is a lived reality, written into the human condition. The danger, of course, is to mistake avoidance for growth. Many people, faced with discomfort, seek distractions: overwork, substance abuse, endless scrolling through digital feeds. Jung would call this an evasion of individuation. True growth demands stillness. It demands turning toward the discomfort, not away. It demands listening to the dreams, the symbols, the faint murmur of the unconscious. Tomaches, even when what it reveals terrifies you. And perhaps this is why individuation is so rare. It requires not only courage, but humility. You must be willing to admit that much of who you thought you were has been a mask. You must confront the shadow without flinching. You must accept that growth is not a straight path but a spiral, returning again and again to wounds you thought you had healed, each time at a deeper level. But for those who endure, individuation brings a freedom unlike any other. It is the freedom of living without pretense, of speaking with a voice that is truly your own, of loving not out of fear or dependency, but out of authenticity. It is the freedom of wholeness. In a world that constantly demands conformity, individuation is an act of quiet rebellion. It is the refusal to vanish into roles scripted by society. It is the choice to live as a singular, unrepeatable self. And though the journey is long, painful, and filled with uncertainty, Jung believed it was the only journey worth taking. Because at the end of it lies not perfection, but authenticity. Not escape from pain, but the capacity to hold pain and joy in the same hands. Not the illusion of harmony, but the reality of wholeness. And that, Jung would insist, is the true measure of a life fully lived. There comes a moment in Jung's story where psychology brushes against mystery, where the measured language of analysis gives way to something almost mystical. That moment is found in his idea of synchronicity. To Jung, synchronicity was not just coincidence. It was a meaningful connection between inner states and outer events, moments when the unconscious and the external world seemed to speak the same language. The classic example Jung often cited came from his own therapy room. A young woman, rational and skeptical, was describing a dream about a golden scarab. As she spoke, Jung heard a tapping at the window. He opened it, and there, improbably, flew in a scarab beetle, one of the closest living analogues to the golden scarab of Egyptian mythology. The woman was stunned. For Jung, this was not an accident. The dream and the event, inner and outer, had converged to deliver a message her rational mind could not ignore. Jung's concept of synchronicity fascinated physicists as well as psychologists. He collaborated with Wolfgang Pauli, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, who was struck by how often strange accidents seemed to follow him, so much so that his colleagues jokingly called it the Pauli effect. Together, they explored the idea that the psyche and the material world might be woven together in ways science had yet to understand. Skeptics dismissed synchronicity as superstition, but Jung defended it as a reality experienced by countless people across cultures. Consider the moments from your own life. You think of an old friend, and the phone rings with their voice on the other end. You wrestle with a difficult decision, and a book falls open to a passage that speaks directly to your struggle. You walk into a room filled with strangers and feel an inexplicable recognition when your eyes meet someone else's. These are not just quirks of chance, Jung insisted. They are signals from the unconscious, markers that you are moving into alignment with your deeper truth. Cultures throughout history have taken synchronicity for granted. In ancient China, the I Ching was consulted not as a prediction machine, but as a mirror of the present moment, a way of aligning inner states with outer circumstances. In indigenous traditions across the Americas, encounters with animals were seen as messages from the spirit world. A hawk circling overhead, a fox crossing the path. These were not random but meaningful guiding signs. Jung drew heavily on these traditions, seeing in them confirmation that synchronicity was a universal human experience. But why does synchronicity matter for individuation? Because it acts as reassurance in the midst of uncertainty. The path to authenticity is rarely straight. It is filled with loss, confusion, and doubt. Synchronicities arrive like road markers, reminding us that even when we cannot see the whole map, we are not wandering blindly. They whisper, "Keep going. You are where you need to be." Think of the man who leaves a career in law, because his soul can no longer tolerate the emptiness. Terrified, he takes a job teaching. On his first day, a student hands him a book, a volume of poetry that he had cherished in his own childhood but long forgotten. The coincidence jolts him. It feels like the universe is nodding in approval, saying, "This is your path." Or the woman who ends a toxic relationship and days later meets someone unexpectedly who treats her with the respect she thought she'd never find. Skeptics may call it luck, but Jung would call it synchronicity, life responding to the decision to align with one's inner truth. Of course, synchronicity does not always point to comfort. Sometimes the meaningful coincidences draw attention to wounds we have ignored. A recurring dream is echoed by a news headline. A symbol that haunts us suddenly appears in real life. These experiences can be unsettling, but they serve the same purpose: to call us deeper into ourselves, to highlight the threads of meaning we have overlooked. In a modern world obsessed with data, Jung's idea of synchronicity remains both controversial and strangely appealing. It challenges the notion that life is random or mechanical. It suggests that the universe is not indifferent but participatory, that it interacts with us in ways both subtle and profound. For those on the path of individuation, synchronicity becomes not a superstition but a companion, a reminder that the unconscious and the world outside are not separate, but woven together in a mysterious fabric of meaning. And so, the next time life delivers you an uncanny coincidence, Jung would ask you not to shrug it off. Instead, pause, reflect. Ask yourself, what is my unconscious trying to say? What alignment is being revealed? Because in those moments, the ordinary becomes extraordinary. The world itself becomes a mirror, reflecting back the truth of your soul. Jung never promised that inner peace was a prize you win once and keep forever. He described it instead as a practice, a decision made again and again, sometimes every day, sometimes every hour. Choosing peace is not the same as avoiding conflict, nor is it a retreat into isolation. It is the active, conscious commitment to live in alignment with your authentic self, even when that choice disrupts the harmony others expect of you. At first, the act of choosing peace feels unnatural. We are conditioned from childhood to smooth over tension, to please others, to say yes when our hearts are screaming no. To set a boundary may feel like betrayal. To end a relationship may feel like cruelty. But Jung argued that the opposite is true. The real betrayal is abandoning your inner truth for the sake of appearances. What looks like peace on the surface is often quiet suffering underneath. And no relationship built on denial can truly endure. Choosing peace means learning the art of boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors with locks, a way of deciding who and what is allowed into your inner sanctuary. At first, setting them feels selfish, but over time, you realize boundaries are acts of love for yourself, and paradoxically, love for others. Because only when you honor your own truth can you offer authentic connection to anyone else. Without boundaries, relationships collapse into resentment and exhaustion. With them, relationships can flourish on the solid ground of mutual respect. This does not mean every relationship will survive. Some will fall away naturally as you grow. Jung often reminded his students and patients that not every bond is meant to last a lifetime. Some people enter only to teach a lesson, to reflect a shadow, to awaken a dormant part of the soul. Letting go of these connections is not failure. It is part of the rhythm of growth. Just as a garden must be pruned for new blossoms to emerge, so too must we release what no longer serves our becoming. And yet, when you begin living in alignment with your truth, something remarkable happens. New relationships arrive, often through synchronicities, as if the universe itself is conspiring to support your growth. These connections are different. They do not demand you shrink or pretend. They invite you to expand. They challenge you, yes, but in ways that deepen rather than diminish. They become companions in the process of individuation, walking beside you as you step more fully into yourself. The practice of choosing peace also transforms the way you see the world. Where once you felt victimized by circumstances, you begin to notice patterns, lessons, mirrors. Where once you sought validation outside yourself, you begin to trust the quiet guidance of intuition. Life does not become easy. Jung never promised that, but it becomes meaningful. The storms still come, but you stand in them differently, rooted in the soil of authenticity. In our modern age, Jung's message feels more urgent than ever. Surrounded by constant noise, advertising, social media, cultural expectations, it is easy to forget that peace is not something granted by the outside world. It is a choice made within. And in a culture that equates worth with productivity, choosing peace becomes a radical act. It is a refusal to measure your value by what others demand of you. It is a declaration that your soul is not for sale. At the heart of all this lies individuation, the slow, courageous process of becoming whole. Not perfect, not saintly, but whole. To integrate the shadow rather than deny it. To embrace contradiction rather than hide from it. To live not as a fragment of yourself, but as a complete, complex, authentic being. The journey is never finished. There will be moments of relapse, times when you fall back into old patterns of pleasing, hiding, or denying. Jung would tell you this is not failure, but part of the spiral of growth. Each return brings new insight. Each step, however small, matters. And so the choice stands before each of us. Will you continue sacrificing your authenticity for acceptance, living a life that looks peaceful but feels hollow? Or will you take the risk Jung invites you to take, the risk of choosing peace within, even if it costs peace without? It is not an easy choice. It never will be. But it is the only one that leads to wholeness. And when you make it, when you finally say yes to your truth, you discover that what you feared losing was never real peace at all. It was only silence. The real peace, the kind that cannot be shaken by rejection or crisis, was waiting all along inside you. And it is still waiting now.